This seems to be working faster, but I've never tried this version. So
it says we're live.
that's what it said. And then we'll have a backup as well. Redirecting. Here we go. Yay. We're in. We're out. We're live. The internet tried to make it hard on us, but we kicked it in its face and won. No, I'm just kidding. The internet doesn't have a face. It's like a many-headed hydra. Welcome to Big If True. We are live from everybody's houses. Certainly not meeting up in public and breathing fresh air. Today, I am so excited to bring to you the team behind the research that we've been doing at Shorenstein for the Casebook project. It's just been an incredible pleasure to work for the last several years on a project with Brian and Gabby and Brandi and Emily have come in on the project at different points. And this was most certainly a labor of love and exhaustion. And this iteration of Casebook is something that we wanted to have out there so that we can have people understand the way that we do research, which seems to be a little bit different from some of the other research teams out there. And we wanted to equip a field of people that are starting to take on media manipulation, disinformation as their thesis and dissertation work. We wanted to teach you how to chunk it out into smaller pieces to get a sense of how do you study misinformation like you would study an event or something that's happening in the world live. And when we began this project, Brian and I really thought a lot about what case studies as a method could bring to the table. And we wrote a little piece called Source Hacking with Data and Society. And that really showed us that there was more to this method that could be useful to many other people, not just researchers, but journalists, policymakers, technologists, educators, and of course, civil society organizers, which is where Brandi initially fit into the team. But now Brandi has gone full-time research, which is great for us because I think she's able to get at some themes and some hard to understand places unless you've been around the block a bit, especially as it has to do with internet culture. So we're going to go around and do a little round of introductions here, and then we're going to talk a bit about Casebook, and we're going to do a tour of the website using this software that we've all started to live our lives on, Zoom. So I will start with Brian. Brian, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the research that you've been up to over the last couple of months.
Sure. I'm Brian. I'm a researcher, an investigator. I spend a lot of time on the parts of the internet that most people don't like to be on. I focus on groups that come from the fringes that have the ability to influence popular dialogue through, as we call, media manipulation and other sorts of campaigns like that. For the last several years, I've tracked most of the fringe movements that have been disrupting American communication, institutional integrity, and have been spending a lot of time translating those into case studies and methodologies that other people can use in their own research, and methods that people can use to get a better understanding of how these places on the internet sustain themselves and the ideologies that motivate these people as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to go next to Brandi, who I've known the longest out of this crew. Brandi, if you want to give a sense of your background and then where you are with your current research.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Brandi Dexter. And I come from, I guess, an advocate activist background, spent years at Media Justice, looking at media access rights and representation and tech accountability, and then spent the last 6 years at Color of Change, also looking at tech accountability and media justice. And as Joe mentioned, starting last year, I began a journey through the Shorenstein program, which actually resulted in being able to write a book. And so that is currently the process that I'm on. And I would say there's like 2 lanes of research that I do with Shorenstein. So one is looking at a digital blackface for different means, in which I work pretty closely with Brian and looking at it for like political chaos or other purposes. And then the other one is, I guess, intra-race disinformation. So how disinformation gets processed in the Black community and what are the sort of historical ties to that and implications moving forward.
Excellent. Yeah, I should say that this week of Disinformation Awareness Week is brought to us by the folks really at Media Justice, as well as United We Dream and the Disinfo Defense League. And I think it's just really important to understand that, you know, Media Justice as an organization has been up to tech accountability for 20 years now, right? It's a long time. So I know I don't want to out you as someone that's been there a while, but you know, Brandi's been in some of the most heated fights about policy and getting traction on some of these problems. I don't even know if we would have a field of folks dealing with media manipulation and disinformation if we didn't have the kind of platform accountability work that you were so instrumental in pushing for years and bringing together very broad coalitions of people that maybe wouldn't have sat down next to one another if not for your efforts to bring people into contact with some of these platform execs, as well as civil society organizations, technologists, security researchers. It's just, the list goes on and on. So we are super thankful for your work, and I'm like, I just cannot wait for this book. I think it's going to be awesome. Next up, we have Gabby, who came to us in January, and I keep saying, "Oh, you just started," but we're coming up on a year now, and unfortunately, we've been in this situation where we've been out of office so long. It feels like time has stood still. But Gabby has been really one of the masterminds behind how do we apply codes and consistency across these cases, shaping the definitions. And so, Gabby, do you want to give us a sense of where you've come from in terms of your orientations through the world of cybersecurity and the like, and then the kind of work you've been doing with the task team?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm a researcher at Task. In addition to media manipulation and disinfo, I spend a lot of time thinking about censorship and internet governance, especially in the global South, and kind of how what happens in the US affects the rest of the world and vice versa, and tying all of this back to civil society and how it affects civil society spaces. What I'm working on now, in addition to the casebook, I'm looking at some stuff regarding COVID, government overreach, surveillance, and how crises are exploited by different regimes. But yeah, no end of interesting things to look at.
That is very true. And you came to us from Citizen Lab, which has its own flavor of research in this environment, as well as Data and Society. You have an excellent report at Data and Society where you went and spent, how long were you away doing field research?
I was only there for a couple of months in Malaysia, but yeah, my family's from Malaysia. I used to live in Malaysia for a long time, and So yeah, it was kind of interesting coming back to a country you grew up in, but to do research this time. So fun stuff.
Well, it's definitely worth a read, and that's we can put up a link on the Big If True page so that people can get access to that ethnographic work, because I think it's super important that we understand the relationship between the kind of qualitative field-based work that many of us have anchored ourselves in as we develop our work in the digital realm and online spaces. And last but certainly not least is our sort of veteran reporter, Emily Dreyfuss, who's really helped us as the senior editor have a voice. One of the big jokes about researchers is that we always miss the lead because we don't really understand what's very important for people to know and what's interesting that we found out. And so we tend to overwrite things and, kind of muddy the waters, not because we don't want to be clear, but because sometimes we're just not trained to be. And I think that the editorial style and the carefulness that Emily's reporting has and the impact Emily's reporting has had really made me excited that she was willing to work with our team on this project and is going to actually be heading up what was just announced today on the Knight website is our news leaders program. And so that's to come. And Emily's gonna help us. Emily's going to be in charge. I'm not going to lie. She's going to tell me what to do. And so, Emily, can you talk a bit about your background in journalism and how that's informed your approach to research in this field?
Yeah, thank you so much, Joan. I'm just so excited to be working with this team. So my background in journalism is, I started in like little newspapers, just kind of reporting whatever you have to report back when newspapers were a real thing. But then my background in the tech industry is that I started at CNET. And I was completely didn't care about technology and wasn't aware of technology at all. And CNET is the exact right place to be if you want to be around people who think technology matters super a lot and is super cool and is going to save the world. Especially back when I was there, which, now I think it's a little bit different. But so I got a really quick education in like the technical landscape of what's out there and what tools people were using and how people were so extremely excited about them. Then I moved to Wired, and at Wired, I got to do the kind of reporting that I had been realizing I really wanted to do, which was how are people actually using these tools? And are there perhaps ways people are using them that we don't understand? And so I did a lot of reporting of like using Twitter to figure out where people actually were and what they were reporting on the ground in the middle of a crisis, and trying to say these tools, we don't think of technology as not a separate thing. Technology is a means to expressing social issues or social beliefs or a society in itself. And it was really, really fun to report that. And it was just interesting because I guess I always talked to researchers like you guys to kind of gut check my reporting or help me figure it out. And so what's been so cool about working on the casebook is that now I get to be in it with you guys. And talking about the style of the casebook, I mean, I've never worked on a project before where every single sentence that was written was conveying a fact. And honestly, I mean, it was really exciting, and I took it really seriously that we don't want to have anything wrong in there because there's no fluff, zero fluff.
No, the fluff comes when I have to give these presentations, and I'm like, and another thing about the way this, it's that's when my sort of Boston knucklehead comes out, and I'm just like, you wouldn't believe the kind of shenanigans some of these people get up to. And so I'm going to share my screen here just so that people can have a look at what we're talking about here, which is at mediamanipulation.org. We've got a really awesome resource And as Emily pointed out, it's written in a style where everything moves back to a source, right? The idea is that we want to be able to document forensically in a way the ways that media manipulation occurs, and then we want to name those tactics. And big respect to Jeb Riley, who did all of the illustrations, and I can go to the about page here so that you can see we have links to Jeb, as well as Kayla Jones, who did the logo and the design work and kind of helped us with shaping our flow here, and then Dev Collab, who kind of put it all together. Amazing folks and organizations to be working with, as well as the rest of the team, including Dwight, who's doing the background here, Nicole Lever, and Jen Nilsson, who's really helped us along. And then we have numerous funders that have pitched in to make sure that the work we do, that we get paid for the work we do, but also that the work we do, we don't have to cut any corners, right? We can really do it fully. And so we're big thanks to Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Open Society, Lydia Shorenstein, the Democracy Fund, Ford Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, the University of Ottawa, and the Miami Foundation, because without those funders, work like this doesn't really come together. If I told you how much it costs to do this right, you'd be like, what? Research is expensive. But I call attention to that because I think that collaboratively, we're in this situation now where research about platforms is really hard to do because platforms have started to obfuscate, have started to lock down data, have started to bargain with some researchers for data and access. And we don't want to get into a position where our field of critical internet studies is beholden to any of the companies we have to investigate or study and analyze. And so it's really important that we are able to maintain that kind of independence in this moment. That being said, if you're watching and you're looking at the website, research is really where we have the very meaty and hefty reports. We're going to drop another report today from Rob Ferris and crew. And so that's going to look at partisanship and Democratic primaries. And it's going to be from, I think, March and April. So this earlier report was January to February. We also have Brandi's report on canaries in the coal mine, COVID-19 misinformation in Black communities. And there was also a panel yesterday, which if you haven't seen it, go to the Media Justice Facebook and take a look. It's people who are actually pretty inspired by Brandi's work to call their panel Canaries in the Coal Mine, and we took a really big look at the ways in which race is exploited by disinformation campaigns. Brandi, do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of research went into this report and sort of where you found yourself as you were trying to make sense of these conspiracy theories and things that were flying around at the very early onset of the pandemic, and maybe even try to give us a little bit of an update on if things have changed?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that it's interesting the way you name that with people inspired by me, because certainly the people on that panel were people that inspired me and that I look to, who have been doing this work incredibly for quite some time. But I think, at that time I was working at Color of Change, and we've had these conversations around research, and the kind of running joke around research, tends to come out years after the fact, and it's a sort of look back and not always actionable in the moment. And one of the things that I appreciate about this program is that it's always putting out research that can be immediately actionable. And so as I was at Color of Change, we noticed in the early days of COVID that there was a lot of stuff flying around that was saying that, melanin protected you from COVID, COVID and all of these other things. And again, this is kind of the interracial stuff I was talking about, where it was misinformation that was not necessarily intended to put Black people in harm's way, but the unintended impact was that Black people were not getting accurate information to each other about the harms of COVID. And so we had gone to Twitter and Facebook and told them that this misinformation was happening. They were slow to act. And we began pretty quick work on this report and turning it. I don't know what the turnaround time on it was, but it was fairly quick in terms of being able to get it out into the world and to tech companies, and had a direct link to some policy changes that we saw at Twitter. Some work at Facebook, a little bit of work at YouTube, but really like starting to take seriously, particularly how disinformation about COVID had a disproportionate impact on Black communities and their health. And I wish I could say we were in a significantly better place, but I do think that the myth that Black people are not susceptible has been well put to bed. And so I do think that people are being like more informed and on the lookout for how misinformation, particularly about COVID, can be harmful to our communities.
Amazing. I appreciate that. And as people are searching the website for different pieces of things to read as well, tomorrow we're going to be talking with April Glazier, as well as Steve Renderos and Roberto Real about the future of media justice. And so this 13 security tips for journalists was written by April. I penned this this piece on how civil society can combat misinformation without making it worse. Before we dig into some one of the case studies, I want to ask you, Brian, a bit about this method that you've been really working on for years that blends investigative journalism techniques with more anthropological and social science oriented ethnographic methods. What do you hope people will get out of reading this this methods for environmental modeling paper that you've put together? I know what I've gotten out of it, which is I feel like I can do this work if I follow the model.
I think that there's been a lot of unfair and unrealistic expectations put on both journalists and researchers in studying what happens on these platforms, particularly around disinformation. There's a lot of fetishization and misinfo itself of how you put together a data set. As we know now very, very clearly, it's very, very hard to study these platforms, and it's getting harder by the day. APIs, the ways that researchers plug in to platforms to extract data sets, are being rolled back by the platforms intentionally. New tools are being introduced by these platforms to attempt to give people some sort of access, which in a lot of our research we find is inadequate to tell the stories that we need to tell of how disinformation and manipulation campaigns come together. Quite honestly, a lot of the time spent on these platforms is just poking around, looking, jumping down rabbit holes. That can be a really daunting task for someone who's not familiar with these spaces. And in investigative digital ethnography, I try to lay out a little bit of how I have learned personally to investigate the sources of these campaigns. One of the things that we point out is that there's going to be a visible layer to planning and organization. There's always going to be a layer underneath that. We cannot know everything, but getting to the point of knowing where your access ends is very, very important to be able to establish boundaries for your research project, rather than sort of obscure or make it seemed to be some sort of heroic task of digging through these relatively dark online spaces. I try to create an outline that anyone could follow. I'm particularly interested in how this can be used by communities who are reliably under attack by disinformation, particularly marginalized communities who we know that have been subject to large amounts of disinformation over the years, but because platforms are very, they do not have transparency for these communities. this is a hack to get around limitations that the platforms have put on us. And the putting these tools into the hands of people to help fight back within their communities is something that I'm particularly interested in.
And I think you do a really good job here, because one of the things that I think once people start reading through this document are going to realize is very quickly they're going to understand, oh, I don't need to know a lot of data science. There are ways in which if you know what tools to use and you know where to look, and you spend the time. I mean, the biggest resource drain on this kind of work is the time you spend, because you actually have to get a sense of like what the sense of humor of these groups are, when things look abnormal. And that just doesn't happen overnight. That is about spending time involved in the environment that you're modeling. And so I think that this is an incredibly important piece. And I love that it's version 1, right, which is going to evolve as technology evolves. Gabby, I wanted to dig in and look a bit at the case study that you put together on endless mayfly. And if I were to pick one of these tactics, which one should I pick to find that?
I think impersonation, definitely.
Impersonation.
Typo squatting also works.
And then we'll hit the filter button and the website should work. And here we go. Looking for Endless Mayfly Network. We found it. Yay. So if you can tell us in maybe 2 minutes what this case study is about and what is significant in terms of this sidebar here in terms of the tactics used. I'd love to know a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. So this was a report I did back in 2019. That feels so long ago, with Citizen Lab, that tracked essentially a network of operators who would spoof well-established websites with false information. So they would mimic, for example, The Atlantic or foreignpolicy.com or the Wall Street Journal. They even spoofed the Belfer Center, which I thought was really funny. But they would basically copy the entire HTML from the website, put it up on a typo squatted domain, so a domain that looks very, very similar to the actual website, but maybe one letter is off, or it ends in like .net instead of .com. But then using all of the same branding and imagery and logos, put in false information. It's hard to say where it was really coming from. We think the network might be aligned with Iran, but we can't really say for certain. This is just based on the narratives they were using, the countries they were targeting, and some of the accounts which showed up in external data sets that platforms had attributed to Iran. So it was a confluence of all these factors that we came together and we're like, okay, it looks like it's Iran aligned, but again, we can't be very sure. So if you scroll to the very top and you look through the codes under attribution, I think we left it as unclear still because it's, while there are indicators, we don't know for certain. And so, yeah, the coding at the top is really what I think sets the casebook apart from a lot of, say, isolated individual case studies, is we try to bring together all these different cases and give common vocabulary so we can analyze across multiple cases while allowing for nuance. So having the life cycle model at the bottom is awesome because we can see chronologically what happened, what were the outcomes, and it gives all the details and nuance that you otherwise would not get. But at the same time, we have these codes up top, which help researchers or journalists look real quickly and be able to compare and see, okay, what tactics are being used, what platforms are being exploited, who are the targets, and all the other cool stuff up there. But yeah, it was definitely took a lot of revisions. I think Brian and Emily can also attest to this, the three of us revising the codes again and again and again and again to make sure that they were grounded in the case studies we had and that the codes were emergent from the data and evidence we had. But same with Brian's investigative ethnography version 1, the code book will be updated as necessary. So as we get more cases, if we need to update the codes, so will the code book.
Yeah, and also invent new tactics, right? Like we got to name these things so we all know what we're talking about. So last but not least, we're going to close out with you, Emily, because I want to look at the methods page, because I know you are in the midst of writing a piece that is tackling this media manipulation life cycle. If you want to talk a little bit about your current research and how the life cycle is helping you in your journalistic mode, make sense of a story and how it's helping you shape in what the important pieces are, so that we don't get into that researcher mode where everything feels equivalent to everything else.
Yeah, I mean, so thanks, Joan. The media manipulation life cycle is so helpful. And so to walk people through it, this is something Joan developed as she had been looking through. I mean, Joan, tell me if I'm getting this right. How misinformation and specifically like planned and coordinated media manipulation goes through this kind of stable pattern where there's always a first part where someone plans how to do it, or at least it kind of has an origin where it emerges out of something. And the next phase is that then those people who created it try to seed it out into the more open, wider web, where you, regular people, or me, or specifically journalists often will come upon it. And then the rest of the life cycle shows how from there, different stakeholders can amplify it, can make it, can either kill it, snuff it out, do the right thing, mitigate it immediately, fact check it, or ignore it, or blow it up, report it as though it's true, spread it to their really powerful networks. And then it's at that point also that, the platforms have to do something about it. So it's really helpful as a journalistic tool, because often we journalists will come upon a piece of misinformation and we have to really quickly make the decision, should we report on this or not? And it's not an easy call. Like often, at Wired, I would come upon something that is like it's a quote unquote juicy story. It's like people on this side of the internet that Brian knows about are trying to get you to believe this crazy thing. And as a journalist, I want to be like, don't believe it, immediately don't believe it. But there's real danger in a journalist with a large platform calling attention to something like that if it hasn't gotten any attention yet and if it isn't going anywhere. So what's really cool about the life cycle model is that it gives journalists and others as well, but for me, I'm really interested in journalism. It gives journalists a framework to look at that data and really quickly go to the life cycle and say, where are we? Where are we at this moment? And if you're finding it on Twitter and it only has 5 retweets and no one of any importance has shared it, it's only in stage 2. And a journalist getting involved is going to put it into stage 3, which is where it gets huge and amplified. And the one thing a journalist, I think we can say, doesn't want to do is instigate stage 3. So that's been super helpful for me, because I've been reporting on disinformation and misinformation for years. And every time me and an editor, or if I was editing and working with a reporter, every time we had to make this call, it was kind of like, okay, what do we think we should do here? We know some best practices, but every time we were kind of like reinventing the wheel. And the life cycle gives this model where actually it works in every case. So I'm working on a little piece of disinformation right now that is about like a cheap fake Biden video where he said something that people have been taking out of context to make it seem like he said something else. And the second I found it, I was able to put it into the life cycle and say, where are we? Is this campaign already taken off? Who's doing what? And it's just amazing. It works.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. It's like, I feel like, the backside of the cereal box here, that it's like delicious and nutritious. I think for us as a team, if I can speak for us, I think what we want our research to be is useful. We don't want our research to be siloed behind paywalls in journals, behind jargon. We want to make sure that people understand, and this is really about our mission as educators, as people who do research and education for a living. The truth still really matters to us. All that talk about a post-truth society and being beyond, or that facts don't seem to matter. I don't buy into it. I'm gonna probably doing this the rest of my life, just to make sure that we have a way to get at the truth, and that we want to reintroduce some stability. Because ultimately, when we give into those kinds of feelings like it's all hopeless and nothing matters, right? Take that nihilistic approach, which can be funny. I'm not going to lie. I like to joke with a little bit of nihilism. But what it does is it actually disadvantages people who really like make this world better by being authentic, by being real, by trying to make sure that people have the information that they need to go about their lives in a healthy way. And for us as a team, it's very important that we don't allow imposters and political elites and media elites to steal the legitimacy of communities that have, utilize the internet to connect with one another, but also have done, the really gritty work of, spotlighting corruption, of organizing social movements. We don't want to lose that because misinformation floods the zone. And we know now that the role that political elites are playing and influencers are playing through their networks and through their worth or their wealth is having a really detrimental effect on all kinds of other professions, including journalism, including public health, including civil society, as well as I was reading today in Davy Alba's new piece, election officials are now tasked with working tons and tons of overtime to deal with election misinformation. And so as you're thinking about the casebook and you're reading it and you're reading through it, and maybe you know of a case study and you want to write something up, we're going to be offering some workshops in January so that people can get involved. And we're hoping that you can grow this with us. And we are so pleased to be able to have it out in the public and let it kind of marinate for a bit. And then as people are thinking about collaboration in this field, we hope they adopt this model and want to work with us on future collaborations and case studies. That's it for Big If True. It's been a pleasure seeing you all. I'm sure I'll see you all on a Zoom call in a couple hours. And so you guys all have a great lunch break and we will be back to basics soon. And for everybody listening or tuning in, we will see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. with our final installment for Disinformation Awareness Week. See you on the internet.
Bye, everyone.